just because it's income doesn't mean it's good income. Even if it's big, but like you said, if you're taking a much bigger risk, gotta sit down and think about that.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Fosivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Hello! It's great to have you listening today. We are back for another installment of our series of special episodes about starting a business. We'll get back to our normal call-in radio format in a few more episodes, but until then, Joe Brinkley, the blind hacker, is back with me again and ready to dive in. Oh, since we both own security consulting businesses, we're approaching this topic from the perspective of starting a cybersecurity consulting business. But most everything we're talking about will apply to any kind of service business. Anyway, let's get to it, shall we? Let's go.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Fosivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
Hey, Joe, welcome back. It's great to have you here on another episode of the Mindful Business Security Show with me. We got a lot of really great feedback on the last in the special series of how to start a business. The first episode we did. This is now the second. We're going to do a few more, but the feedback has been fantastic so far from my side. So, thank you for working with me to help get this together. And it sounds like folks are, hungry for this information, and it sounds like it's been very helpful so far.
Yeah, I've definitely I've had some folks approach me, and like I was telling you before the show, definitely helped a few other folks kind of get their initial start, explaining just the basics of how to get started, how to form the LLC, what names to choose in a business, what names not to choose, ideas behind what could go wrong, what could go right, and then really building out just like an initial good business structure, which is good news, is kind of all the things we're going to be talking about today.
And, last time we covered a lot of information. So if anybody that's new to the podcast and you're just listening to this episode and you haven't listened to the last one yet, you might want to go back and start with that one, because we covered a lot of like the pre-work stuff of starting a business, kind of finding your why, and, why are you doing all of this? We talked about some business entity types. We talked a little bit about the finance side of this as you're trying to spin up a business and some of the options you may have there, those types of things. So a lot of stuff we covered that's pretty foundational. So if you are new, maybe check that one out and then come back to this episode. But this one's going to be chock full of more good stuff too.
Well, I think that with that, let's get it started. So to kind of continue our script is we've got steps to creating the LLC. There's again, we've talked about a lot of why, where you should functionally go. God, we had so many good ideas in our planning, and then we kind of overflowed it. And we had to backtrack because we're not trying to give away the whole cookie right away, and then going from there. But I think one of the most important things to me, right, and this goes towards branding. This goes towards even like if you're public imaging yourself, and you're I do some talks occasionally called well, now they're called Control Alt Brand, how to start a brand here. I think so. The first thing that you would do is, what are you going to call your business, right? Because you don't want it to be necessarily in our cases, you got accidental CISO, the blind hacker. Those are really cool handles, and they have meaning and they do things. And while we could on the back end start the business as those things and then do a DBA or doing business as, but I think the idea would be like, naming and giving your business a good name. Because what's in a name? Well, for a business, everything, right? Because if you name your business Bob's Funding, and then you go to look for funding, they're going to be like, wait, you're supposed to be funding, and are we giving you money to give to people? Or if is it super samurai cyber shop, and they're like, wait, are you super samurais or are you a cyber shop? It gets really interesting when you start talking about good positive names. And of course there's businesses out there that have very simple names. Just go look at any street and you can see lumber or hardware.
Yeah, those are really good points. And there are, there's something I have to think of as you're picking a name is, do I want to pick a name that the name of my business is very clear about what it is that I do? Or do I want to pick a name that is a little more, broad and open and I get to define what that is? And some of what goes into that decision is, how confident you are once you've decided you're going to start this business that does something. How confident are you that that is the thing that this business is going to do? Or do you think that there is the possibility of needing to pivot at some point? So, as I was naming my business, for instance, I wanted to go with uh, so I had a strategy as I sat down was thinking like I wanted to come up with a name for the business that sounded more like you know bigger company sort of thing that didn't pigeonhole me into a
Yeah,
specific thing, a specific type of work. I didn't want information security or something like or infosec or something like in
yeah,
the
yeah,
name to restrict me. I wanted the name to be more broad, but that the name could also like would still apply and tie to what I'm doing with security with meaning, but that I could also flip to do something else. There's also something to be said as you're picking the name is your name that you operate under doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the name of the business entity. So you could
that's
have
correct.
the business entity uh, XYZ Enterprises LLC, but then doing business as Bob's Hardware
Yep,
or whatever the name that you want to be the front of the business and registering that doing business as name or that fictitious name with the state is easy. In some states it's free. I would imagine in many it's free or inexpensive. So as you're thinking about this, like you don't have to come up with a name for the LLC that's going to lock you in. You do have some flexibility, but
yep.
coming up with a name that can mean something and can give people an idea of what you do, or at least you can build a brand around. And like I said, I went more with the building a brand around a new word versus trying to come up with something that was super descriptive.
Yeah, yeah. My very first business was Next Frontier Technology, and I had pigeonholed it strictly into doing a lot. Well, in a weird way, into doing IT as a global thing, and then got my name on some of those lists, and constantly was getting emailed, "Hey, I need data recovery. Hey, I need a computer fixed. Hey, I need you to run around and install RAM in a bunch of systems." And while it was neat at the time, it certainly wasn't the thing that I really wanted to be doing. And then upon dissolution of that company, and then years later creating my current company, which became Next Gen Red Team. Now, I chose that name because, in our industry, for our friends and peers, you say the word next gen, their eyes roll into the back of their head. You're like, oh, okay. But at the same time, I wanted it to be the play on words because, again, a lot of the things that I'm doing through Next Gen Red Team is training the next gen of Red Teamers. When I get some work and I bring on some junior folks and I have some senior folks and I have some mid level folks, they say, hey, I'm going to grab a team here. You, and you. You guys are going to work together. You're going to learn from each other and help build the next gen of red teamers. Again, I'm very offensive security prone. I know it in and out. I do it really well. So for me, I did ultimately kind of pigeonhole intentionally this time with a name. Now, again, as you said, doing business as means you could also collect things, but it's one of those things that a lot of companies go back through. IBM and Google and all these, big companies, they didn't come out and say they're not just Google. Ultimately they're supposed to be Alphabet Inc. or Alphabet LLC, or IBM is IBM or International Business Machines LLC, and then, or whatever, they've gone through and they did the DBA. They're doing the doing business as now, instead of big old name, they're IBM, they're Google, they're they've been able to drop the LLC from their business full name. You can still add it to the charges and stuff, but it allowed them to get rid of some of that extra stuff, because you have to in some states. My state, I remember reading that for the first time, going, oh, well, how do people not name their thing, Bob's Hardware LLC? It's a doing business as.
Yep, that's a really good point. When I picked mine, I knew I wanted to do consulting, so that's really where I focused. And what I consulted in was going to be secondary. And so, folks listening to the show have probably noticed that the podcast is brought to you by Focivity. Well, Focivity is my company that I started, and I came up with that word. Invented it myself. It wasn't one that had existed before. I was rather
Yeah.
surprised at that when I Googled it, when I came up with it, because I really liked it. And when I Googled it, I realized, like, not only was the domain available, but it was not used anywhere. Like, the closest hits that Google got were some misspellings of things. So it wasn't a word in another language. It wasn't a word in other countries that speak English or anything, even though it sounds English based. So I got to
Yeah.
find it
Yeah.
myself, which was kind of cool. But I also was able to trademark that name so that
Mm.
my company can be branded as Focivity, not always Focivity LLC. Now, on my contracts, it still says Focivity LLC, but on all of my branding, it's just purely Focivity. Uh, so,
Ah.
uh, you know, I, I think one thing that folks struggle with picking names, and I want to talk a little bit about my thought process I went through as I was picking the name, because that's an area where
Sure.
I've actually gotten questions about, and sort of the process that I went through to come up with the name. Um, as I was brainstorming my business, one of the things that I did was I brainstormed multiple pages of words, and those words were the value that I wanted the company to provide to me, to my clients, to the world, um, basically. And so, out of multiple pages, that it was the things that the company was going to do, the value it was going to provide. And so, I started picking, just some of the words out of there that resonated the strongest with me. I sort of prioritized those, and then looked up common. As an English speaker, I look, working with English. I looked up common prefixes and postfixes, whatever, for uh, words in the English language, modifiers to change the root of a word to something else. And so one of the word that I ended up picking was focus. Helping my clients focus on the right things. I wanted me to focus on the right things as well. Huge part of why I was doing what I was doing. And so I took focus, and then I started playing with these word endings, uh, and using
Ah.
the root of it, FOC. I was able to add IVITY, ivity, to create a new word, and it just sort of clicked. So that was the process I went through as I was trying to create this name. So because it is hard to find names, and it's hard to find domains at this point. So if you really are looking for something that you can create a brand around, that is one of the things that might be important. And hopefully that the process that I went through to do that, maybe that'll be helpful to folks as they're trying to come up with names for their businesses.
I do like that. And like you said, now you can own that word. There's not currently any massive negative connotations or anything around it, and that's good. That's neat.
And when you mention the negative connotations, that's important too. Is search that word and make sure that word that you just came up with, your name of your business, doesn't mean something in another language as well.
Yeah.
Because you may end up with a word that you really like, ends up meaning something kind of dirty, maybe a slang or something in Spanish or Italian or French or something, and you've never, heard that before. But it is worth at least checking those things.
And then as you get through the naming process, and you get these beautiful headers in the mail, and from your approval from your local state folks, your state business administration, and then you get to file all kinds of fun paperwork. And that's actually interesting that we have kind of such a, we've got this in multiple areas, but this is one of the reasons you and I almost practically started this level of the podcast, was specifically because we both had worries over things like the PRO Act and the Corporate Transparency Act, which is I've had to now file my Corporate Transparency Act paperwork through my business to tell them who my beneficiary is, and so then you can start getting these other things, and your yearly fees and articles of organization and articles of incorporation and things, and then filing with your local state folks, and then going from there. So again, I'll say I've been lazy, more or less. I've used a filing agency that yearly files all of my required works. So I don't know, if you came to me and said, how am I supposed to file this manually, I actually wouldn't know. I would have to use a business lookup, or go turn around and see what they've been submitting, copy and paste it, and build it. Because like I said, I've been having somebody else submit a lot of my yearly fees and yearly things. I just pay them, and they take care of it.
Yeah, and I found it's actually surprisingly affordable to have somebody do that stuff and
Yeah, yeah,
know that it's being done correctly. Um, and those folks also can help you pick whether, as you're doing all your filing to set up the business, like they can help you pick, LLC, S corp, C corp, that sort of thing. Um, Honestly, for most folks listening to this episode, like if you're just trying to understand how to start a business, C corp's probably not for you. Um, with
right.
the exception of, like, if you know that the business you're starting is that you are going to go and seek funding and do the startup thing and all of that stuff, it might be worth starting as a C corp, but
Fair.
most likely starting as an LLC. Like, you can switch from an LLC, you can take the S corp election. And we talked about that in the last episode, to be
Past
taxed
serenity
then as
versus, text. Yep.
an S corp. So you don't have to make a real hard decision here. If you just start as an LLC, when you do decide that it is time to create a business entity, you can move from LLC to S corp. You can move from LLC to C corp, uh, as you get advice from, your tax professional, your business lawyer, those
Yep.
kinds of folks there. And honestly, one of the things we were talking about right before I hit the record button that was actually a really good bit of conversation, uh, was around estate planning and
Yes.
the kind of operating agreements and those types of things when you create the LLC. Like, if you're creating the LLC and it's a partnership and you got more than one person involved, like, you absolutely want an operating agreement there. But the lawyer also, even if it's just you, the lawyer can help you understand from a estate planning standpoint what you need to do. Because if this is just a side hustle, it may not be a huge deal that, if something happens to you, that, nobody else is able to come in and, like, shut down the business and do the other stuff. Nobody may care. But if it's what you're
Yep.
doing for a living, and maybe there's other people dependent on you, as part of your estate planning or succession plan, you may need to make sure that you've got something set up. Maybe your spouse is a shareholder or something like that, so that they can come in, access the bank accounts, do what they need to do to spin things down. And that's, again, where your business lawyer and your tax advisor can help you navigate those pieces. But I think for
Certainly.
most folks that are just starting, you know, either doing it, personal, under your social security number, like we talked about last time, when you get to the point you're doing an LLC, just, or a business entity, start with an LLC. Like, that's going to be the easiest and most straightforward uh, way to do things. And you mentioned that the beneficial ownership information. again, I'm not a lawyer, so this isn't like authoritative information, but if you need to file this BOI for, if you've got an LLC, especially if you got an EIN, and I think that's really the biggest piece, if there's an EIN
Correct.
associated with the LLC, if you need to file this and you don't, the fines get very, very steep very, very quickly. So
If
if
I
you
recall
have
off
an
the top of my head,
LLC,
500 a day
something
or
like that,
something.
yes,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. Like it is per day, is the way my lawyer explained it as well. Now she handled filing this paperwork for me. As we did this, I think it was like $150 to have her do it for me and just make that little problem go away. Uh,
Yep.
but it is something that if you have an LLC that you created in the past, especially if you have an EIN for it, you probably should look into this beneficial ownership information requirement that the federal government put out. Because if you don't file that form that basically identifies who the owners of the LLC are, who is behind that LLC, that business entity, the EIN, that the fines get very, very quickly once you pass the deadline to do it. And I don't recall what that deadline is off the top
The
of my
first of the
head.
year of
Okay.
2025.
So, yeah, you've got a few months left to do that, but you either need to shut it down if you're no longer using it, or you need to make sure you file this paperwork.
Yeah. The interesting thing to me about that this whole thing was is I get where and why they're doing it because now they're trying to be able to see a little bit more in behind the corporate curtain. But here's the interesting thing. So as we talked about different states, different filing statuses, there were LLCs that you could hide behind, and then but some of them have become a little bit more transparent, as it were. There's no longer a full curtain. But I did find out, so the only people who do see this ultimately is the government. So you're not filing with your state where people can request state information. So now they've got to go to a either the IRS or some other form of an agency that you're filing this with and get ultimately ask for the information there, because I had somebody tell me, oh, but if I still use a Wyoming LLC, which is you don't even have to put an owner's name in it. Well, that's still true for the state and the holding of the LLC in Wyoming. And a lot of folks use that as like the ultimate. That's the main LLC or the main company that the whole. And then there's all these. I put my property in property LLC. I put my car in car LLC. I put my other business things in other business LLC. But you could still have the Wyoming LLC be this larger holding company that is ultimately owns all those. Well, I found out the concern was, well, is that transparency broken? Well, yes and no. No, from the state that Wyoming is not collecting that information and posting that on their business registry, but the federal government is, and we know how they are with information.
Actually, you just mentioned holding companies there, which is something else that uh, my lawyer took care of as they were filing my LLC for Fosivity. They went ahead and checked that box that this was going to be a holding company, uh, just so that it was all set up, so that down the road, if I want to create any additional LLCs under the company, for instance, if I want to take the podcast and spin that off into its own
Yeah.
LLC, that LLC just for the podcast could be then owned by the company, but the company's now a holding company, and it can do that for me. So that little piece of framework is in place, even though I'm not using it yet. I haven't gotten as advanced as you are with creating, all these different things for different areas of life with vehicles and real estate and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's
I haven't
someday.
gotten that macro, but I did separate the yeah, the next gen is separated from my brink of the beach, which is the vacation home else. I did do that, but I haven't. I think it's weird to put each property into their own one, which some people suggest. That's more filing paperwork, man. I don't. The less paperwork, the better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, so I think as you get the business set up, um, now you've gone through, you've decided, okay, I'm going to do my LLC. I've talked to my lawyer, or maybe I'm using LegalZoom, or you're just doing it yourself with the state, Now you've got your LLC. You've got your paperwork back, your certificate back that says, okay, this exists. You know, next steps at that point. We talked a little bit about an operating agreement, especially if you have partners in the business. That is super, super important because that's what keeps the partners from having these stalemates. I see on the Reddit subreddit for small business happens a lot. Folks will ask the questions about, well, my partner and I were 50-50 partners and we disagree on how to do X and how should we decide? And, inevitably somebody writes back with it. Well, what does your partner agreement say? What's your operating agreement say? Well, we don't have one. Okay, this is why we need one. Now, if you're just an individual creating a LLC again for a side hustle or just dipping your toe into consulting, it's not. If it's just you, this isn't important. But if you've got partners or shareholders or anybody else in the business, you definitely want to make sure that you get onto paper a little bit of this governance. How are we going to make decisions when there's disagreements? How much are we going to own? Each of the percentages, those types of things in the business are two of the most important things to put into there. Any other thoughts on that, Joe, before we
No, I think
jump to
that's
EINs?
I think that's the good way to do it. Again, it's building the proper paperwork, and not only that, but like we've said, if you need to have a significant other on it, you can say, hey, operating agreement. Okay, hey, this person who is a 1% shareholder or 1% partner can help break a tie. Or two, or maybe they've got 2% of the company, or some number somewhere that is equitable. Again, it's that's literally how you stand everything up. I could go on, we could probably do a whole episode on good ways to make it, but frankly, work with a lawyer, work with the filing company, or if you're using like Zen Business, LegalZoom, any of those things, like definitely work with that. Read through it, understand that you don't. That's not exactly how you can operate the company from now to infinity, but until you file changes, that's the way legally the company will operate. There you go. That's my 2 cents.
From there, once you get that paperwork back, for most folks, if you're not worried about operating agreements and those types of things, the first step really should be, in my opinion at least, to go get that EIN from the federal government, from the IRS. And the EIN is your employee identification number. We talked about a little bit in the first episode, but this is like the social security number for your business. Instead of doing it under yourself, you can use your own. But I personally like to keep things like in their own little boxes and clean and separate, and each thing has a purpose. And in this case, like the LLC has a purpose, it has an EIN, it is its own entity, it has its own tax ID number, and now like it makes it that much easier to keep things separate and apart. I did learn, as you're trying to get your EIN, uh, there are a ton of websites that want to sell you an EIN, that want to sell you registration services. Uh, EIN is free and it takes like 10 to 15 minutes on the IRS website. It is super simple to do. So if you are Googling for how to do an EIN and you land on any site that wants to charge you money to get your EIN, you're in the wrong place.
No, yeah, that's definitely thin, right? Don't I did pay a little fee, but that's because when I was reading through it, I wanted to get mine expedited. There's an expedition fee, but that fee's actually paid to the IRS, not to, because if you're not, it's first in, or I guess it's first in, first out kind of thing. So they process it normally. You put some extra cash in front of it, and suddenly you get a little bump in the line. So if you do it the normal way,
Even without, mine came in minutes, even without expediting. So the system
really,
was really fast. So
okay.
that was useful, but at the same time, they may have changed things between when you did yours and when I did mine as well. So that could be a piece of it, but I do know that when you find the right place on the IRS to get the EIN, it should be free. So if somebody's trying to charge you know 200 or $300 or
Right.
whatever
That's
to do it,
ridiculous.
it's yeah, it's not. You know, and then you know now you've got your EIN, and you can take that letter, the SS, I think they call it SS4 letter from the IRS. You'll take this
Yep.
PDF of this that you download in real time, along with your certificate for your LLC registration, and you can take that to your bank and set up a business bank account for your bank. And it's
Highly
super easy.
recommended.
Yeah. Again, it's yes, very highly recommended because keeping the money and the transactions separate is really important. It's so much easier to do the books if only the business's transactions are in those accounts. Um, you know, and I even went and got a credit card in the business's name as well. Once I had the bank account set up and all that, went to Chase and got one of their Chase Inc. Uh, I forget
Yep.
exactly which one I did, but they had multiples, and I picked one. I was a little surprised when you do the business credit card, they do ask for. And again, this is all very U.S. based, you know, U.S. focused in what we're talking about. So folks that are outside of the U.S., things may be a little different in your country, but the bank in the U.S. did ask for the my social security number in addition to the EIN, so that the credit card is in the business's name, but as part of their identification checks and those types of things, opening the account, they did still want my information as well. So it's worth calling that out.
We could go into all kinds of talks about funding and money and yeah, you know, the good news is ultimately you as a person are responsible for it, but also the business, right? So it's not utilizing your credit currently to get some funding. You know, in this case, extra credit, you know, whatever it be. I did the exact same thing. I went out. My first business, like I said, the one I dissolved many years ago. Um, didn't get any credit for it, which is probably why I wasn't operating very well. This one, the day I got my first paycheck and had money in that bank account, I went to the bank and said, I'm guesstimating that I'm going to make this much for the next 1, 5, 10 years, and they gave me a sufficient credit card with plenty of rewards and miles and fun stuff and you know, but again, make sure to pay them because since you did make that PG or personal guarantee, you know, for whatever period of time that you would be responsible for it, because I don't think it's indefinitely; it's a period of time that the personal guarantee. But again, read the rules and conditions, and then make sure to be able to operate it and use it and do smart stuff with it, like you know, maybe get a PO box.
And honestly, I find that when I do my expenses, the fact that literally everything, you know,
Oh yeah,
95% of my business expenses are on that business card. You know, I'm earning the points and stuff on it. It gets paid off every month, so I'm not paying interest on it. But the fact that QuickBooks can sync those transactions in off the card, and I'm
yes,
not worried did I miss something because literally everything's there. If the transaction is on the card, it's there and I have to worry about it. And I'm not trying to hunt down receipts that I've forgotten about and worried about that. And one other thing before we jump
sure,
on the next topic, with the business bank accounts, when you open you at least want to open a business checking account so that you know you can pay bills and that kind of stuff and whatever you need there. I also recommend opening a business savings account at the same time. You don't have to put a ton of money. You know, you can put $20 in each to open them. You know, whatever your bank tells you. My bank was like, you don't even have to fund them right away. And so I just put $20 in and that particular day into each, and went on my way. But having a business savings account gives you a place where when you're setting money aside for taxes, or you're setting money aside for whatever else, you're not keeping everything that the business has in that one checking account that
right.
is your operating account. You do have another account that you can move money off to into a savings account. If that starts to accumulate, you can look at money market accounts. There's other business investment accounts and things you can do that if you start accumulating cash in the business that want to earn more interest and stuff on, you can. But I think for most folks just starting, start with a checking account, savings account, and business credit card, and you're in really good shape at that point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, One thing as I was getting mine started is when I send out invoices, I didn't want to send my home address as the mail to address on all my invoices that go out. Uh, so I signed up for a PO box with the post office. It's a couple $100 a year. It's gone up a little bit. Maybe it's like $250 a year or something like that now to
Yeah.
have a PO
Yeah.
box. But it's relatively inexpensive, especially if you're doing this as your main thing that's supporting yourself. Like a $250 business expense is not huge. Um,
You said it the right way. Business expense. Well, some people, like, again, having walked some folks through some of this recently, they're like, "Oh man, that's. I mean, really, I should do that, even if I'm just consulting." I'm like, you don't have to, but keep in mind your address, your personal home address where you register the business to, will be on every single document. So if you send it to somebody and they look up your house and see that you know, it's the same thing I've done with resumes when reviewing them. Oh my gosh, this person wants to do this much work, but they live in a 6,000 square foot mansion or a 235 square foot trailer. It's judgy, it's whatever. But if you have a PO box or even a work share place or anything like that, it's a perfect reasonable business expense. So if you're making a lot of money and you're like, oh crap, I don't want to pay a bunch of taxes, it's an expense. Boom. You have money come in, you got money going out. You've got it taken care of.
Anybody who goes and knows how to look this stuff up, like your LLC registration with the government, like that's still going to have a real physical address on it. That's probably going to be your house at this stage, unless you're using a registered agent, office, not a lawyer, or somebody who specifically offers registered agent services. Uh,
Correct.
and basically, that just means they're the ones who are registered to receive paperwork, official paperwork, like from the court. If somebody's got to serve your business paperwork, that's where they're going to serve it to. It's got to be a real address. It can't be a PO box. But everything else, all your invoices, anything that you publish more publicly, that can have your PO box on it, so that you don't have to have your home address on everything. So that's the way I went with it. It's not a huge deal. It's not super expensive. It's enough that some people, like Joe said, might worry a little bit about, man, I'm just getting started. I'm trying to, uh, you know, save a little bit of money here. Like this is one of the corners you can cut early on, but as you start getting more clients and more business, you'll probably want to do something there, uh, with a PO box. The last topic, because we already covered business credit cards. So the last topic for this episode that we want to talk about, uh, is insurance. And I know everybody loves insurance. So we saved it
Thrilling.
for last. We're saving the best for last, right? Um, yeah. So, you know, I've been talking quite a bit here. So I'll let you talk a little bit here initially on
Sure.
insurance before I chime in.
So to me, insurance is a interesting thing. Again, my company, my LLC here is for side projects, passion, and to funnel some money away from me to a business that I can then, again, as we've talked about, money in, expenses out. If normal people, instead of having a W-2 and paying taxes now, if we just paid at the end of the year, it'd be great, except for those of us that have to pay a lot of taxes because we didn't have enough expenses. So, but the benefit of insurance here, I actually operated for the first company, no insurance at all ever. Very dangerous, but it's not unheard of. I didn't make enough money to pay like into FICA, workman's comp, any of the. I didn't hit any of the regulatory numbers.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I definitely was when I first started my first business. I was much younger. I was 24. Yeah, 24. And then dissolved it when I was 27. And I definitely, it was a miracle that no one attempted to sue me. Not because I made a bunch of mistakes, but there were certainly obligations and things as a kid. I acknowledge I was younger and personally less thought went into things that I did then, and it was just amazing that nobody ever called me on shenanigans. I did good work. I had great clients. I got clients to this day. But like I said, it was just one of those things like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was running around literally without protection. um,
Yeah.
and then this business, the only type of standard protection I had, again, being a consultant too, we don't produce hardware. That's fantastic. You produce, if you even make like hardware, like you want to go into IoT, you like to make badges for conferences, you do anything, and you want it to funnel through and have the write off for your hobby or your side job, your side business. Don't call it a hobby. That's great. But the you might not need things like that. But this business, I definitely have the standard like business insurance, and then just because I do cyber work, I did get a $1 million policy for cyber holding client data, especially doing again red teaming and stuff. If my system now gets compromised, I literally have a map to hack the client, especially if it was recently a report that I did recently, right? Like that doesn't feel good. If I get hacked, first of all, like that doesn't feel good in the first place. But then also, man, now I've got to let my clients know I had a breach. And it may, the thing is, I don't know. I use cloud storage, or I don't know. I use this. I don't know what the extent of the data they may have taken is. So now you go tell them, hey, you're going to change every password, everything I had access to, take that report and do this. And if it costs them money, they could be coming back at you. So now you've got to have cyber and breach insurance. And so now I carry a standard operating $1 million policy, a standard policy $1 million, and then a standard the cyber insurance of $1 million. And it's not expensive. I'll be honest. It's frankly, it's not much more than the PO box. I think mine was, and I just repaid it. I'm thinking the credit card statement showed like $445 with all the extra riders. I had a few extra riders just for again because I do some software, not much, but some software. So what do you think about that?
Yep. Yeah, I agree completely. As folks are they getting their business set up, insurance is not something you're going to need probably right off the bat as you're just getting things going. Uh, but then it really comes down to just like everything else that we do in cyber comes down to risk management. What is the risk that something could happen? And the way I do business, I tend to try to do everything fairly and transparently. The chances of me getting sued are really, really low just because of the way that I do business, uh, and the type of people that I work with and clients that I take on. But something bad happens, you do need to be set up for that. So there's different kinds of business insurance. Joe mentioned if your normal business insurance is going to cover business assets. Let's say your business laptop. Uh, any other assets that the business has, if they're damaged, stolen, whatever, your business insurance is going to be able to cover the business's assets. Uh,
Yep.
you're going to have business liability insurance as well. So that's going to cover, some sort of damage that the business causes to another business. Uh, those are very, very standard. Another one that Joe mentioned was the E&O coverage, errors and omissions. With consulting, especially, that's one I feel is kind of important, uh,
Yes.
because if I go at a consulting and giving somebody advice on something, and either I'm wrong or I don't tell them something that I should have told them, and they take my advice and things don't work out well for them, uh, what have you, and they come back and want to sue me because the advice that I gave them was wrong or insufficient, that's where this comes in. So now it's not purely the business, has done something, whatever, but it's coming down to like me and the specific advice that I'm giving clients. Uh, and for every insurance company at different states may be different here as well. My cyber coverage, I also feel this is very important for any of us doing cyber work for the exact reasons that Joe explained, is that we've potentially got things we could consider to be sensitive information from our customers, from our clients, as we're providing our consulting services. Uh, so, things that I do to mitigate that is to have as little access to things as possible. In fact, my contracts even stipulate that the client will give me the minimum required access to complete the project. Uh,
Very nice.
to things. I minimize the amount of data that I store locally on my machine, and have the typical best practices with drive encryption and all that kind of stuff set up as well to try to protect this stuff. And then I don't keep that information for forever. A certain amount of time
No.
passes beyond the end of the project, and I'm destroying that data. And that's part of, also it's in my contracts and my non-disclosure agreements, that I'm only going to keep that data for a certain amount of time, and then I'm getting rid of it. So don't come back to me in 3 years and expect that, hey, that thing you did for me, do you still have that? Yeah, I'm not going to have it. So the cyber insurance is for mine, it's combined with the E&O
Yeah.
policy, but different companies may do them slightly differently. uh, One of the things that was interesting for me to set up for myself was workers' comp. That's one that it was a little weird thinking like, oh, I'm going to set up workers' comp for myself. But even though I do most of my work remotely, I do occasionally have local clients where I go on site with a client or a channel partner who is trying to resell my services, and I'm in an in-person meeting. Where workers' comp will now help is if I am somehow injured when I am out on site working on behalf of my company, doing what I'm doing, making sales meetings or what have you. That's where workers' comp can come in. And if I end up not being able to work, workers' comp is able to pay, some small amount, and the uh, premiums are based on payroll and what you report that you pay and the salaries and that kind of stuff. And it's not terribly expensive. Like the workers' comp for me, I think it's like $120 a year um,
Okay.
to have. And that was, putting in, I think I had set a salary of like 60K a year, which is what I use as my base salary for the company. Because that's what I needed in the first episode we talked about. That was the kind of the number, one of the numbers that I came up with was like, this is what I need to meet expenses bare minimum. Um, and then the last insurance sort of thing, unemployment insurance. This one you're not going to hit with your LLC, but you'll hit this one when you switch to an S corp and you put yourself on payroll. And
Correct.
your payroll provider will walk you through unemployment stuff. And generally will just fully facilitate that as part of their withholdings. But I just wanted to mention unemployment insurance as well, because it is one thing that businesses pay. And if you do go down the road of S Corp, that one will show up.
Yes. Now, I mean, the benefit of the LLC is, yes, there are other insurances you can pay yourself. Like, there's not necessarily unemployment, but hey, I'm paying for my retirement. I am paying some forms of insurances. But yeah, S corps, C corps, of course. Yeah. Now that you're being taxed as payment, right? The rules change. You definitely, I would say, yeah, that makes a whole lot more sense. I think the unemployment thing gets interesting. Like, well, the only way I'm unemployed is if something bad happens. But again, you very well could go from a workman's comp to an unemployment. I actually didn't think about the workman's comp thing. When I was refiling insurance this year, again, just my starting my fourth, or starting 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess, yeah, starting the fourth operating year. Um, They asked me if I wanted it, and I was like, I don't think I need it really. And but you're right. What if I go to a
Yeah.
client site and my leg ends up backwards, or wet floor? Okay, that's great. And now the good news is workman's comp is I've just recently had to go through with this with a good friend of mine. He had to use workman's comp because he got severely injured at work. And the whole thing is very interesting. The two lawyers show up, they battle it out, and ultimately determine a lot of things. And if you don't have workman's comp, you're just a person in the building. Now you have to pay for a lawyer to do some of these things, and it's not just as said, what would that mean? I only make 60,000 a year. Now they're going to pay me my $41,000 a year if I'm out for a year. But again, it's more. This is for short term. While you heal, you get better. But again, now if there's misconduct, like turns out that floor is persistently wet because there's a leaky pipe, while that's not your workman's comp necessarily, but now that your company, your workman's comp guy is going to their company lawyers going, hey, this happened at your facility. Was this negligence? Well, again, it gets really complicated, way outside the scope of this, but it's now that you've mentioned it, I might go back and add that writer.
Yeah. And your health insurance also may give you trouble, when you go to the ER with that broken leg or whatever, and, they're asking, oh, what happened? And you're talking to them and telling them, and your health insurance company may come back and say, no, this is a work related injury. This is not
Mm-hmm.
under your normal health insurance. And you may end up with an issue there as well. So, yeah, that one was interesting for me to have to put together. One other thing I forgot to put into our outline as we're going, but I just remembered with the business insurance and E&O and all that. I have some channel partners who are like IT managed service provider, at least for me, IT managed service providers, other cyber firms who resell my services or make referrals and those types of things. When I'm working with their clients, I have a couple of them that have required that I provide them a certificate of insurance that names them uh, as a named insured, and it's something that at first I was a little weirded out by. But after talking to some folks and talking to my insurance agent and that kind of stuff, apparently this is actually very common and something that a lot of companies actually should be, and probably not enough ask for this. But the certificate of insurance, my own insurance company does this. I know others do as well. A lot of them, you can go to your customer portal and basically go click through and find the certificate of insurance thing. And there will be a button in there to create a custom one that you can put your client or your channel partner or whatever in there, uh, to provide them as part of the paperwork. That it proves to them that you have insurance. And it's my understanding as well is that it allows them to access your insurance if something happens without having to sue you first. um,
Fair.
Again, I
Yep.
am not
Yep.
a lawyer, and so I'm not like I haven't had to deal with this specifically. This is just my understanding from what I've been told, but it is something that you may come across when you've got your business insurance and you're working with clients. You may get a client that asks for a certificate of insurance that shows your coverages and that kind of stuff, and also names them as insured by you, for your interactions with them.
Very interesting. I have not gotten to that sophistication yet, but good to know. Good to know.
That's come up with bigger channel partners, and they also had my coverage for like E&O. I ended up having to do like 2 million for my E&O and cyber and stuff because they had higher requirements because they're a little bigger companies. Uh,
Yeah.
so that was an area where I turned that. So like all my insurance altogether, it's about $2,000 a year. It's still not super super expensive as business expenses go, but it's not
Right.
quite as affordable as yours is because I had to go with a little higher coverages.
I also went for a slightly higher deductible because I also do, again, personally, this is a total personal thing, just recommended. I do keep a little bit more cash on hand specifically for the business, right? Like, again, it's not this is my side income. This is your primary income. While you don't clearly pay yourself every dollar that comes in because you need to have operating expenses. I have a much larger operating expenses because I do this for fun. I do this for conferences. I do this to teach my friends how to hack and get to pay them to do it, right? So, different goals for the business. So, again, I haven't seen a need to go any higher, but hey, if any channel partners need me to go higher, they reach out. I'll gladly do it. And the benefit too is it's not like car insurance or some of the other insurances to the degree of like you could literally these guys are always wanting to get me on the phone. Hey, do you just want to do an insurance check-in? So adding workman's comp or injury and adding another $1 million, they'll be glad to do it very quickly too.
And as it scales, it doesn't get super expensive as it
Right.
scales. Although I do know that some companies are when you're starting to need 5+ million in coverage, it can start getting a lot more expensive. And I know some companies are even having trouble finding individual policies that will cover that high.
Yeah.
But I think most folks listening that are looking to start businesses to just do independent consulting or side hustles, those types of things,
Yeah.
probably aren't
Yeah.
going to need that kind of coverage. And if you do have a gig that you're looking at that's going to require it, it might be worth stepping back and saying, is this aligned with my strategy here or not?
Yes. Very good point. Very good point. Like just because it's income doesn't mean it's good income. Even if it's big, but like you said, if you're taking a much bigger risk, you gotta sit down and think about that. Well, any other final thoughts?
No, that's everything we wanted to cover for this step for creating the LLC and what to do immediately after and just getting things stood up so that you're in a place where you can conduct business safely once you've made the decision that a separate business entity is the way to go. So, uh, yeah, I think my final like closing thought on this loops back to what we were talking about at the very end of the first episode, though, is that you can test the waters before you dive in. You know,
Correct.
I made the decision and dove in head first and didn't test. I YOLO'd it, like I said. Most folks don't necessarily have to do that. And so doing all of this stuff, like you can test the waters, you can dip your toe in without doing all of this stuff as long as you're just, careful and make sure that that you know what you're doing, what you're getting into, setting expectations with your clients and that kind of stuff appropriately. Uh, but once you get to the point where you're actually setting up the LLC and you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to make a go at this. All these things are relatively easy. This is stuff you can get set up inside of a couple of days. Um, with your LLC, your EIN, your bank accounts, insurance, all that stuff. Like it was really fast to get this stuff set up, and maybe a
Yeah.
week total by the time I had to go through underwriting with insurance and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't a slow, drawn out process. So once you know you're ready to do this stuff, it's well worth it to make sure that you're positioned and you've set up the foundation of the business to get ready to start operating. Yeah, thanks, Joe, for jumping in with me on this.
Thanks for
This is
having me again.
great stuff. I hope folks like it. I hope it's informational and helpful. And I'm expecting, we'll get more feedback if people have more questions. They'll ask questions, and we can, if we get any, questions that are of particular interest, we can always let folks know at the beginning of the next episode as well if there's a question that
Correct.
came
Yeah.
up that is widely applicable and all of that. So we'll wrap this one up here and we'll be back for another. I think we still got what, three more episodes that we have planned to do, but I think this is a good place to break this one. And, the next one we'll jump into running the business.
Agreed. Thanks for having me again. We'll chat with you on the next one.
Thank you, Joe. It's been great having you on again. And I also want to make sure I give a big thank you to all of our listeners. I know I say this every single episode, and I really, truly mean it. We're doing this show for you, and it means everything to me that you're listening today. So I hope this is valuable to you. If any of this is something that you think that friends or family or other folks in your network need to hear or would find useful, please don't hesitate to share them. It helps out the show as well. And we'll be back before too long with the third installment of this series. So until next time, I'm Accidental CISO. Stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity.